All right, so how is the data collected by these robotic missions to be applied? What are you going to do?
Okay, fair enough. Well, what we believe is that the data that we can get from the robotic missions, we can get it back equally as well. It can be applied in the same manner that human missions can. I mean, after all, most of the time, it's really not humans doing any of the analysis. You still need that machine that's going to tell you, okay, with spectral analysis, this is the kind of elements I'm seeing in this rock. With, some kind of probe, you are seeing that this is the composition of this rock, what is going on here. So this is really, we're still dependent on robots, even though we might have humans there. So even with human mission, you're still dependent on it. So we do not see why simply have that human element in there. It is unnecessary. All these people can be sitting somewhere at a NASA research space station and saying, okay, now we need to analyze this rock because that is important to show really what kind of elements are on Mars or on Europa. We do not see why there would be any kind of problem with that. And if necessary, those robotic missions can be perfectly equipped to take all this data and put it back to Earth. They can still return. It's not that big of an issue to make an automated robots. Thus far, the cost-benefit analysis has not been favorable for this kind of proposal. But if NASA so decides, it is perfectly feasible to return those samples even with a robotic mission.
Negative question for the affirmative. A reminder to keep questions and answers to 1 minute.
Well, since the affirmative are that much interested about the results for the humankind, I would like to ask whether how would they justify the fact that since if we are for the human missions, we are losing important resources that we can actually use for combating real problems that we have on Earth, or and by finding new technologies, by finding new information and new data from space that can help us to invent new technologies, for example, to detect and deflect asteroids.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the issue of costs, and I'm going to answer it in 2 ways. So first of all, in terms of exploration, the amount that we actually spend on space exploration is comparatively very small. For example, in 1 year, the NASA budget for space exploration was around $15.47 billion. In contrast, for that same year, $565.5 billion were spent on gambling, and $31 billion were spent upon tobacco. So, although the United States obviously has some problems with drugs and gambling, clearly the costs of the space exploration program are not a big concern. In addition to this, the factors, I would also like to point out that since we are debating which method is best for space exploration, I'd like to point out some of the costs of robotic missions. And as my partner brought up in one of her speeches, these costs have been dramatically increasing. And this is because essentially humans are very compact marvels of engineering in terms of what they can see, what they can touch, and how they can think. And the more that robotic companies try to duplicate these effects, the bulkier and more expensive these robots become. And it is for this reason that costs have so dramatically increased. In fact, according to Atlantic Magazine, although the Pathfinder mission was around $0.5 billion, it increased to around $1 billion with the Mars missions, and is projected to reach about $6.5 billion for a mission that is scheduled to run in 2025. So we can see that the more that we try to make robots humans, the bulkier, more expensive, and less efficient they become.
Affirmative question for the negative.
Yes. You stated earlier, actually, in your last speech that humans can't go to Mars yet, so we shouldn't. But at the same time, you said that robots can't return as good of samples right now, as many samples, but they will. What evidence do you have that supports that, or why do you think that we shouldn't pursue a mission to Mars just because we haven't done it yet?
Well, what we can clearly see is that, as you have mentioned, the mission to Mars have not been conducted yet. Well, you were talking about how it is important for us to do the human missions, but since we can see that these missions haven't been conducted yet, we can clearly see that the results that are brought by robots are sufficient, or at least the side affirmative. They didn't brought us an example or any proof of that these human missions will actually do anything better than the robots haven't already done on their missions to Mars. So we can clearly see that since we are able to explore these areas with robots, then it is the burden of proof of side of affirmative to show why actually we should go there further with the humans.
So in the same line of questioning, if you're saying that
Well, I'm sorry, we can't really do follow-up
Oh, sorry.
questions. Negative question for the affirmative.
Why would you want to get the resources from the space when it's quite clear that it will cost more than we would gain? And secondly, even if it was beneficial and we would benefit from it, why are the humans necessary to do this particular activity?
Okay, so our resources on the Earth are obviously being depleted, and we have far too many people on Earth to be able to sustain our civilization on Earth. The United Nations estimates that nearly 3/5 of the 4.8 billion people in developing countries lack basic sanitation, nearly 1/3 have no access to clean water, and a full quarter lack any form of adequate housing. So we're saying we could send people to space if they wanted to create a space base, and there they would be able to find adequate energy sources. There's nucleothermal emission systems, solar panels in combination with fuel cells, solar panels in combination with storage batteries, and helio concentrators that are all being developed right now for use on a space base. So we have the ability to send humans there, and they would be supported with adequate energy sources. We're not saying we should capture that solar energy and bring it back to Earth, although there is a Japanese company that's trying to do that right now. And we're saying we could mine asteroids and take that iron ore, for example, back to Earth if we wanted to use it here. So we should be exploring all the options that we have. If we have unlimited potential of energy sources in space, why aren't we tapping into that, and why aren't we using it?
Affirmative question for the negative.
Yes. So you focus on the cost of space exploration and even claim that we could not come out even for exploration, even if each kilogram that was returned was made of gold. So if this is the case, how do you propose compensating for the cost of space exploration, and what specific benefits do you propose to even out these costs?
So what we see here is that, to a certain extent, right now we do not know what the return on investment might be. What we're seeing here is that the most valuable resource we can really get from space is knowledge about how it works, understanding of its processes. The missions that are designed to get something from space would in fact cost far more than it would be to get it here on Earth. And it is not that big of a deal that we have some tremendous shortage of the materials you claim. Sure, you might get some raw materials, but you're not going to get sanitation in space. So all of the things that we need are right here on Earth. And why? What do we need from space? The only thing we believe that we need from space is the knowledge, so that we can help ourselves here back on Earth. Planetary science, for instance, can help us combat the effects of climate change, which is a severe impact we'd really like to address. Slashing costs would allow us to either do more or to focus more on the problems that we have here on Earth. So obviously, we believe that robots, since they're way more cost effective, they can help us achieve the same, but we can also focus on Earth as well. Thank you.
Negative question for the affirmative.
Since robots do not require any life support system, which really comprises most of the load, and since not returning slashes the cost by around 80%, how do you propose that a human mission can ever reach the cheapness of robotic missions?
Well, we already brought up how looking into the future, actually the costs of robots are going to be rising, and when we're looking at human missions, we can substantially lower those costs. But on a more basic level, the reason why the scientific value is more, I guess it's better because number one, it has more value, and number two, we can bring back more of it, is because when we send a human to another planet, number one, they actually return and they can able to bring back more samples. Actually, they're bringing, as my partner already brought up, they're bringing back significantly more amounts of samples than these rovers. And the benefit of getting back more material is that humans also actually apply this material. They're actually able to observe it, make conclusions, and draw conclusions from this evidence. And the main issue in today's debate is how are we actually going to apply this science? And on the affirmative side, it's very clear. When we're looking at science and the purpose of exploration, really, as I already read off the definition of exploration, it's go into the literal purpose of exploring something is to go into another realm. So basically, the purpose of exploration is to figure out how, if, and why we should send humans there. And through the gains that humans are able to see, we're able to recognize life forms that the rovers in 1977 couldn't. We should be basically prioritizing this quality rather than just quantity when we're looking at human missions.
Affirmative question for the negative.
Okay, fair enough. So you claim that. Oh, sorry.
So close.
All right, so I believe that you said that the resources we could tap into in space are more expensive than the resources available on Earth. Could you give me an example or any evidence to back that up?
For example, the inventions that happened on the international space station, there were several like objectives that were developing, such as the observation of the crystallization, which was the affirmative made you believe that it was completely unique. And for example, it can happen only in space. But on the contrary, for example, on the University of Michigan, the same process was a very similar process was already done and it didn't cost the billions of dollars. And this is only one of the several examples how these inventions committed in space for tremendously big amounts of money can be as well done on Earth.
And one final negative question for the affirmative.
Okay. So, first of all, you mentioned that there's a certain lack of resources here on Earth. So, first, we kind of see the problem that then the problems you talk about really is, for instance, the lack of sanitation. So we do not really see how those two connect. And if we consider that, for instance, the possibilities of getting our energy from either cold fusion, nuclear energy, wind, which actually can provide 2 to 3 times what humanity currently desires, or solar energy, which currently can provide up to 2 times what humanity currently desires with energy, we would like to ask you, where is the problem and how does space provide the solution?
All right, so the main problem that we're experiencing here is essentially lack of living space and lack of abundant resources to go around. And the solution that we propose is exploring the abundance of these materials in space. So although there are some sources of energy which are currently keeping us alive today, it would be foolish to just ignore the abundances that are available in space, since it's clear that obviously those resources won't be there for us forever. And I'd also like to point out that the reason why humans in particular need to go and look at these resources is to develop a lunar base, because although it's definitely possible and even under production to develop methods to harness the energy on extraterrestrial bases, it is much more difficult to send back this energy towards Earth because, first of all, it would be very expensive, and second of all, the energy would likely be depleted. So essentially, in order to deal with the problems of faltering energy sources and loss of land on Earth, we are proposing merely that we look into the vast quantity of these resources that's available in space and extend the human perception there.